World News Now. U.S. President Donald Trump announces a trade deal with South Korea. Under that agreement, the U.S. will charge 15% tariff on imports from South Korea.
He also says that Korea committed to $100 billion in LNG purchases, with potentially more investment to be announced in days to come. And in exchange, Trump will then impose tariffs of just 15% on all Korean exports to the U.S., including on cars.
1 day to go. The latest deal that has been announced is the one with South Korea, as mentioned. Goods from that country will now face a 15% tariff, according to the administration.
In a move that stunned global markets and rattled Washington's trade circles, South Korea has officially suspended all trade with the United States, an unprecedented act of retaliation, President Donald Trump's latest round of tariffs. The shocking announcement came directly from Seoul's Blue House early Monday morning, sending shockwaves through financial capitals from New York to Tokyo. For the first time in their 70-year alliance, South Korea openly declared a temporary freeze on bilateral trade until Trump lifts the economic restrictions targeting Korean steel, electronics, and automotive exports. According to Reuters and Bloomberg, the decision followed weeks of growing frustration in Seoul. Trump's new tariff package, imposed under the banner of America First, added 25% duties on steel, 20% on semiconductor components, and 15% on automotive parts, sectors that form the backbone of South Korea's export-driven economy. The move immediately triggered protests from Korean business groups and condemnation from top government officials who accused Washington of treating an ally like an adversary. "This is not partnership. This is punishment," said South Korean Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok in a televised address. Until the United States reverses these unfair tariffs, all trade and financial cooperation will be suspended. Within hours, the Korean won surged on a wave of nationalist sentiment, while the KOSPI index tumbled nearly 8%. Shipping ports in Busan and Incheon came to a near standstill as customs agencies halted all U.S.-bound shipments. Korean conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG declared trade standby status, effectively freezing logistics operations tied to the American market. The White House, blindsided by the announcement, reportedly held an emergency meeting with trade and defense officials. According to Politico, Trump was furious and accused Seoul of economic betrayal, vowing that the U.S. will not back down. However, analysts say the move exposes a critical flaw in Trump's tariff strategy, alienating strategic partners while trying to isolate China. "It's one thing when China retaliates," said one senior analyst at Brookings. "It's another when a U.S. ally that hosts American troops decides to shut down trade entirely. This is a diplomatic earthquake." Seoul's decision also came with a subtle but powerful message. In the same press conference, President Yoon Suk-yeol announced that South Korea would begin new trade dialogues with the European Union and ASEAN nations, effectively pivoting toward regional cooperation without U.S. involvement. Meanwhile, Beijing wasted no time seizing the opportunity. Chinese state media praised South Korea's bold stand against Western protectionism, and insiders revealed that Chinese trade envoys had already extended offers of partnership to Korean exporters. "If America closes its doors," one Chinese official told the Global Times, "Asia will open new ones." As global investors reeled and U.S. officials scrambled to contain the fallout, one thing became clear, and the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted overnight. What began as a tariff dispute was now threatening to unravel decades of strategic and economic trust. And this was only the beginning. By dawn the next day, the full scale of South Korea's move began to sink in across Washington. Inside the White House Situation Room, senior trade, defense, and intelligence officials huddled in emergency meetings, trying to understand how one of America's most trusted allies had suddenly become its biggest economic headache. Reports from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned of immediate disruptions in semiconductor imports, automotive parts, and lithium battery components, critical materials that fuel not only America's consumer market but its national defense sector as well. The Wall Street Journal described the scene in stark terms. The U.S. is facing a trade rebellion, and it's coming from its own allies. President Trump, already under pressure from domestic manufacturers over inflation and job losses, lashed out publicly. In a fiery social media post, he accused Seoul of ungrateful behavior, and threatened to impose total economic consequences if South Korea didn't reverse the freeze. But behind closed doors, U.S. officials admitted that Washington had few immediate options. Unlike China or Russia, South Korea was deeply embedded in America's defense supply chain, meaning any extended freeze could cripple U.S. technology production within weeks. The Pentagon quickly grew concerned. A confidential memo obtained by Politico warned that the suspension could delay key defense contracts, including fighter jet avionics and missile guidance systems. South Korea is not just an ally, one defense insider explained. It's a core component of our technological backbone. Meanwhile, the global response was fast and divided. In Tokyo, Japan expressed quiet concern that it might become the next target of Trump's tariffs. The European Union called for urgent dialogue to prevent what it described as a fracture in the free trade alliance. But in Beijing, officials were quietly celebrating. China's Commerce Ministry released a statement welcoming Asia's shift toward independent trade, offering to expand its Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, as an alternative to U.S.-led systems. And Seoul, sensing a strategic opportunity, began strengthening ties with both China and the European bloc. Within 72 hours, South Korea announced a new trade corridor with Singapore and Vietnam, focusing on electronic components and green technologies. The speed of the pivot shocked Washington and impressed much of Asia. "This isn't just retaliation," said an analyst from Bloomberg Asia. "This is Seoul announcing that it can survive, even thrive, without the United States." Wall Street reacted violently. Semiconductor stocks plunged 10%, automakers followed, and investors began shifting assets toward Asian markets. The US dollar weakened against the won and the yen, while oil prices jumped amid fears of global supply disruptions. Inside Washington, one official summed up the growing fear. "We tried to isolate our rivals. Now our allies are isolating us." The White House tried to project calm, but markets, allies, and adversaries all saw the same reality. The post-World War II trade order, built by the United States, was beginning to crack from within. And for the first time in decades, Asia was writing its own rules. By the end of the week, the economic shockwaves from Seoul's decision had spread across every major continent. What began as a bold protest against Washington's tariffs had turned into a global realignment of trade power, one that few in the West saw coming. According to Bloomberg Economics, South Korea's freeze had triggered over $180 billion in suspended trade activity, disrupting everything from semiconductors and automotive parts to advanced batteries and 5G components. American factories began reporting shortages within days. Tesla, Boeing, and General Motors all faced halted supply shipments. Wall Street analysts warned that if the freeze continued for even 2 months, it could cause a cascade recession across multiple U.S. sectors. Meanwhile, Asia was moving fast to fill the vacuum. In an extraordinary summit held in Singapore, finance ministers from China, South Korea, Japan, and members of ASEAN announced a framework to expand intra-Asian digital and manufacturing trade, effectively bypassing U.S. systems altogether. The deal, described by the Financial Times as the dawn of an Asian trade order, aimed to stabilize supply chains through regional cooperation and local currencies, reducing dependence on the dollar. China quickly capitalized on the shift. Beijing offered Seoul a sweeping minerals and energy agreement, promising uninterrupted access to rare materials and new export routes for Korean goods through the Belt and Road Network. The move positioned China not just as a trading partner, but as the stabilizer of Asia's economic future. In Europe, reactions were mixed. Germany and France urged both nations to de-escalate, but privately, European leaders were watching Asia's self-sufficiency with growing unease. "For decades, we looked to the U.S. for stability," a French diplomat told Politico. "Now, Asia is proving it can sustain itself without Washington." Back in Washington, the panic had turned into quiet disbelief. Treasury and commerce officials briefed Trump that restoring normal trade with South Korea might be the only way to prevent a full-scale supply chain collapse. Yet politically, the administration couldn't afford to back down. "The tariffs were meant to strengthen America," said a former White House economic advisor. "Instead, they've exposed how dependent we've become." In Seoul, the atmosphere was triumphant. President Yoon addressed the nation declaring, South Korea will not be dictated to, not by neighbors and not by allies. Crowds filled Gwanghwamun Square waving flags and chanting, "Korea first, Asia strong." What began as an act of economic defiance had turned into a national symbol of independence. As the dust settled, the global message was clear. The balance of trade power had shifted east. And in that moment, one era quietly ended. The era where Washington set the world's rules and everyone else followed.